Are you ready to learn the truth about what killed more people in the Wild West than bullets or arrows? In the harsh conditions of the Great Plains and northern forests, man's main enemy was not predators, but moisture, which penetrated clothing and stole body heat. Hypothermia crept up unnoticed, and a wet hunter could die in just a few hours, even in above-freezing temperatures. The indigenous peoples of North America honed their survival skills over centuries, where dry clothing meant the difference between life and death. They did not have membrane fabrics and synthetics, but they created technologies that surpassed many modern counterparts in reliability. Their methods of protection from the elements were based on a deep, almost scientific understanding of the physics of materials and the properties of nature. Every detail of their clothing, from the seams to the fringe, was the result of thousands of years of evolution and adaptation to the environment. European settlers often perished in places where the locals felt comfortable, precisely because of their inability to stay dry. Watch the video to the end to learn how ancient chemical treatment of leather saved entire tribes from hypothermia and why the fringe on a jacket is not just for decoration. What if I told you that everything you believed about the primitiveness of ancient technologies is not true? The secret to the waterproofness of Native American clothing began long before the first rain, in a complex chemical treatment of materials. Native Americans used smoke not only to preserve meat, but also as a powerful reagent to change the structure of leather. It was real chemistry, accessible to people of the Stone Age. Campfire smoke contains special substances called aldehydes, which bind to collagen fibers in the skin at the molecular level. This process created irreversible chemical bonds that changed the very essence of the material. As a result, the skin stopped absorbing water and, more importantly, did not harden after drying. Without this treatment, wet skin would turn into a hard shell. The smoking process was long and required incredible patience and precision from the craftsmen, who were most often women. The skins were sewn into a bag and hung over a pit of smoldering coals. It was important to maintain the fire in a special state so that it produced smoke but not heat. Overheating could irreparably damage the structure of the skin, making it brittle. To create thick, cold smoke, specially selected rotten wood of certain species was used. Rotten willow or poplar gave the best results in a special golden color. The master had to constantly monitor the process, regulating the air supply to the coals. This art was passed down from generation to generation and was considered a vital skill. The smoke penetrated deep into the pores of the material, covering each fiber with a thin but durable protective film. This coating worked like a modern water-repellent impregnation, but was much more durable, as it became part of the leather itself. When water hit such a surface, it did not absorb, but collected in beads and rolled off. Even a heavy downpour could not quickly penetrate this chemical armor. This technology allowed hunters to remain mobile and effective in all weather conditions. Ordinary rawhide becomes slippery and heavy when wet, and stiff when dry. Smoked deer skin, on the other hand, always retained its velvety texture and elasticity. This provided the freedom of movement necessary for silent movement through the forest. Different types of wood produced different shades of color, which served as a kind of marker of quality and tribal affiliation. Willow gave the leather a pleasant golden yellow hue, popular in the plains. Walnut made it dark brown, which was considered more practical for hunting in the forest. The color indicated how deeply the treatment had penetrated. Interestingly, the specific smell of smoke also played a role in camouflage during hunting. It concealed the natural scent of humans from the sensitive noses of prey, which were accustomed to the smell of forest fires. However, the main purpose was still to protect the material from destruction and decay. Untreated leather in a humid climate quickly began to decompose and lose its strength. Smoke acted as a powerful natural antiseptic, killing bacteria and fungi inside the fibers. This allowed clothing to last for years, even in the constantly damp conditions of the eastern forests. The Iroquois and other tribes in the region were famous for the quality of their suede thanks to this method. Europeans quickly realized the advantage of this technology and began to order clothing from the locals. We would love to hear your opinion. What do you think about these ancient chemical technologies that worked without test tubes and formulas? Write about it in the comments. And be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapters. Are you ready to learn the truth about the most recognizable detail of Native American clothing, which we tend to think of as just decoration? Many of us have seen fringe on the jackets of Western heroes and considered it just a style element of the Wild West. However, behind its external beauty lay deep folk wisdom and the need to survive in harsh conditions. Initially, this detail of clothing had a purely utilitarian function, far removed from fashion. It was a real engineering system for water drainage, which literally saved lives during prolonged autumn rains. In those days, getting soaked to the skin meant risking hypothermia or pneumonia, which often led to death in the wild. Long strips of leather sewn into the seams worked like complex drainage channels. They drained excess moisture, preventing it from being absorbed into the main part of the garment. During heavy rain, water inevitably flows down the surface of any garment in a single stream under the force of gravity. For a leather shirt, this was a real challenge, as leather has a tendency to become heavier when wet. If the surface of the garment is solid and smooth, the water has nowhere to go and simply rolls down. As a result, it inevitably accumulates at the horizontal seams, forming puddles in the folds. The main danger lay in the seams as the water began to soak into the threads holding the costume together. The threads acted as a wick, drawing moisture deep into the structure of the garment. This icy moisture then penetrated directly to the body, cooling it sharply and causing severe discomfort. The fringe was designed to intercept these streams of water, preventing them from lingering on vulnerable areas of clothing. This mechanism worked due to a physical phenomenon known to us today as the capillary effect, although the Indians understood it intuitively. When water hit the clothing, it sought the path of least resistance and rushed down the hanging strips. The strips of leather served as a kind of guide, drawing moisture away from the seams. The stream broke into many small rivulets, each of which flowed along its own leather cord. It flowed to the very ends of the leather cords, where it accumulated under its own weight and collected into heavy drops. The fringe worked continuously while it rained, acting as a continuous pump. From the ends of the fringe, the water simply fell to the ground, bypassing the main seams and surface of the suit. This simple mechanism prevented the most important parts of the shirt or pants from getting wet. This allowed critical areas of clothing to remain relatively dry even in severe weather. Of course, it was impossible to completely avoid getting wet, but the fringe bought precious time. The longer the body remained dry, the more strength a person retained for hunting or traveling. The longer the fringe, the more effectively it drew moisture away from the wearer's body and the main surface of the fabric. Long laces dropped droplets at a considerable distance from the pants or shoes, keeping them dry as well. This was a brilliant use of the simplest laws of physics to solve a complex everyday problem for nomads. Europeans who saw this for the first time did not immediately understand the true purpose of the strange hanging strips. The placement of fringe on a warrior's clothing was never random, chaotic, or dictated solely by aesthetics. Each strip was in its place, verified by centuries of trial and error by many generations. The women who sewed the clothes knew exactly where water collected most quickly. The fringe was sewn exactly where rainwater accumulated most often and posed a real threat. On the shoulders, the fringe worked like an effective drain pipe, diverting cold rain away from the arms and chest. The shoulder seam was the most vulnerable spot, as it was where the main flow of water from the sky fell. By diverting water away from the chest, the Indians protected their lungs from hypothermia. This was critically important for maintaining health in the absence of medicine. On the sleeves, it prevented water from flowing into the cuffs when raising the arms, while archery or doing household chores. The water ran down the elbows and fell off the fringe without getting into the sleeves. On the side seams of the pants, it protected the legs from water running down from the jacket. The entire design of the costume was based on one main idea: to remove moisture from the body as much as possible. In addition to its main drainage function, the fringe helped heavy leather clothing dry much faster after the rain stopped. Leather saturated with water became very heavy and could deform as it dried, but the fringe accelerated this process, saving the garment from damage. The many individual strips of leather increased the total area of moisture evaporation several times over. The wind blew freely over each strip from all sides, quickly removing excess moisture. The laces fluttered in the wind without sticking together, providing excellent ventilation. A solid piece of leather would have taken hours to dry in the same conditions, remaining damp and cold. A jacket with abundant fringe dried in literally minutes of active movement in the fresh air. In winter, the fringe served another, equally important protective function for hunters and warriors. Against the backdrop of white snow or bare trees, a human figure was too conspicuous. The fringe broke up the clear silhouette of a person, masking their contours and making them less visible to enemies or animals. The blurred outlines allowed the hunter to get much closer to their prey. Hardened fringe could become brittle, start to rattle when walking, and interfere with the hunter's smooth movements. Therefore, craftsmen paid special attention to the processing of these details, preserving their softness and elasticity. Often, the fringe was cut directly from a single piece of leather during cutting, without being sewn on separately. This made the construction even more reliable and durable. Over time, of course, the fringe also acquired the status of a decorative element, indicating the wealth and status of the owner. The longer and thicker it was, the more leather the warrior could afford to spend. It began to be richly decorated with porcupine quills, rare glass beads, or dyed in bright natural colors. When in motion, the decorated fringe created a beautiful rhythm that was appreciated in dances. But even the most richly decorated ceremonial costumes always retained their original protective function. Native Americans never made things that were only beautiful but useless in everyday life. In the culture of indigenous peoples, beauty never came at the expense of practicality and reliability. Every element of the costume had to help a person survive. Do you think this technology was more effective than modern raincoats, which do not breathe? Want to know a secret that will change your perception of clothing reliability and sewing methods? In the modern world, seams are considered the weakest point of any waterproof equipment, as the needle leaves holes. Native Americans brilliantly solved this problem by using a unique natural material: animal tendons. Tendons extracted from the back or legs of bison, moose, or deer have amazing properties. It is natural collagen, which reacts to moisture in a completely different way than the plant fibers we are used to. When tendon thread gets wet, it does not rot or lose strength like cotton. On the contrary, it begins to absorb water and increase significantly in volume. At the same time, the thread becomes slippery, sticky, and elastic, filling all the voids. When sewing, the craftsman used a bone awl to make a neat hole in the leather. Then a dry, thinly split thread from a prepared tendon was threaded through this hole. When the finished garment got wet in the rain, moisture penetrated the holes in the seam. And this is where the real magic of nature began, ensuring watertightness. The tendon instantly swelled with water, completely sealing the puncture in the leather from the inside. Thus, each seam became completely impervious to moisture, as if it had been filled with glue. Water simply could not pass through the dense plug of swollen collagen. The heavier the rain, the denser and more reliable the seams on the clothing became. Preparing tendons for sewing was a long and laborious process, which was done by women. First, the tendons had to be thoroughly cleaned of meat and fat residues. Then they were dried in the sun until they were hard, almost stone-like. After that, they had to be broken up with stones into the finest individual fibers. The quality of the thread directly depended on the length and the strength of the raw material taken from the animal. The back tendons of bison provided the longest fibers, suitable for sewing teepees and outerwear. For finer work, such as embroidery on moccasins, deer tendons were used. Craftswomen kept the best bundles of tendons as their most valuable possessions. This sewing method required a special technique and great physical strength in the fingers. The tendon had to be constantly moistened with saliva during the process to keep it elastic. As it dried, the seam pulled the pieces of clothing tightly together, creating an almost monolithic structure. It was impossible to tear such clothing along the seam, even under extreme stress. Unlike plant fibers, soft tendons did not rub the skin in places where they were pierced. They were a related material that moved, stretched, and breathed along with the clothing. This ensured the incredible durability of the products, which could last for years. The use of tendons is an example of the ideal waste-free technology of the past. European threads, which later appeared with traders, were often rejected for critical seams. Cotton quickly rotted in damp conditions and did not seal holes effectively. Traditional technology remained unrivaled for creating true hiking clothing. Don't forget to like this if you are impressed by this natural self-sealing technology. Are you ready for the shocking truth about what the most reliable raincoats were actually made of? In addition to chemical treatment with smoke, there was a more direct, mechanical method of protection from water. Indigenous peoples knew very well that fat repels water and used this property. It was an ancient analog of modern clothing waxing. Only animal fats were used instead of paraffin. The impregnation mixture was prepared from a special internal fat of a bear, raccoon, or beaver. These animals naturally have thick fur and a layer of fat that protects them in water. Their fat has unique properties. It does not spoil for a long time and retains its plasticity in the cold. Beeswax or fur resin was often added to the mixture for thickness. The impregnation was used primarily on shoes and the shoulders of outerwear, the most vulnerable areas. The fat was rubbed into the leather with the hands, carefully warming it with the heat of the palms. Sometimes the clothing was slightly heated over a fire to open the pores of the leather as wide as possible. This allowed the protective compound to penetrate deep into the structure of the material. This treatment made the leather darker and slightly heavier, but guaranteed absolute dryness. Water simply rolled off the greasy surface, unable to cling to the fibers. For moccasins, this procedure was mandatory during the spring thaw. Without it, the shoes would get wet in a matter of minutes of walking through the mud. However, this method had its own significant drawbacks that had to be put up with. The grease could stain other clothes and had a specific pungent odor. This smell could give away the hunter, so clothes could be changed before an important hunt. In addition, grease-soaked leather did not breathe as well, which caused sweating. Therefore, fat impregnation was used sparingly, wisely, and only in the necessary places. Subarctic tribes had special recipes for mixtures with the addition of charcoal. Charcoal acted as an absorbent and gave the mixture additional strength. Ochre mixed with fat also created a protective crust that was resistant to wind. The seams on the soles of moccasins that came into contact with the ground were treated with particular care. The thickest mixture was used here, often with the addition of hard resin to protect the threads. This prevented the seams from rubbing against stones and damp ground. Such a sole lasted much longer than untreated leather. Caring for such clothing required regular renewal of the protective layer after rain. After each serious wetting, the impregnation had to be restored by hand. This was part of the mandatory evening routine by the campfire. Taking care of the equipment was the key to the survival of the whole family. The Plains Indians also often used bison bone marrow to soften leather. It had excellent penetrating properties and made even rough leather elastic. This was important for belts and horse harnesses, which also suffered from moisture. Did you know that some hikers still use these methods today to waterproof their boots? Soft leather moccasins were the ideal footwear for moving silently through the forest, but they had one drawback. They got wet quite quickly in water. To keep their feet warm and relatively dry, a simple insulator was used. This insulator was ordinary dry grass, which was widely available. The Indians collected special types of sedge or soft steppe grass growing on the plains. The grass was carefully dried in the sun and twisted into soft, voluminous bundles. These bundles were tightly stuffed into the moccasins around the foot on all sides. This layer created an effective air cushion between the cold ground and the foot. The main property of dry grass was its hygroscopicity and porous structure. It absorbed moisture that appeared from sweating feet or seeped in from the outside. At the same time, the grass itself retained its heat-insulating properties even when wet. This distinguished it favorably from cotton or wool, which lost heat. The grass layer worked like a modern high-tech thermal sock, wicking moisture away from the skin. The foot remained warm, even if the outer layer of the leather moccasin was wet. This prevented the formation of painful calluses and the development of fungus. The grass also protected the foot from rubbing against the rough seams of the shoe. In the evening by the campfire, the used wet grass was simply removed and thrown into the fire. In the morning, the moccasins were stuffed with fresh, dry grass, ensuring cleanliness and comfort. This resource was inexhaustible, free, and available at every campsite. There was no need to wash and dry socks, wasting time and firewood. In winter, the layer of grass was made much thicker to protect against the cold. Moccasins were specially sewn larger to accommodate more insulation. Some tribes used rabbit fur or bison wool instead of grass. But grass remained the most popular material because it was easy to replace. The ability to lay the grass correctly in the shoes was an important skill that was taught to children. The grass had to lie flat without clumping together into hard lumps. Incorrectly laid grass could rub the foot raw in a couple of hours. Correct laying ensured comfort during journeys of tens of kilometers. Tribes living in swampy areas used dry sphagnum moss. This moss had unique absorbent properties, absorbing 20 times its weight in water. In addition, sphagnum is a natural antiseptic, which is beneficial for hygiene. It helped heal minor wounds and abrasions on the feet. This method allowed light leather shoes to be worn even in harsh winter conditions. Europeans often suffered from frostbite in their stiff leather boots. The Native American system was flexible, warm, and easily adaptable to the weather. It did not require complex manufacturing or repair. Today, the principle of removable insoles is used in modern polar footwear, but it was the people who lived in harmony with nature who first proved its effectiveness. What I'm about to show you is prohibited in 12 countries. Just kidding. But this tool was so simple and effective that its ingenuity is mind-boggling. In winter, the main threat to dry clothes was snow, which melted when it came into contact with heat. To prevent this, the indigenous peoples of the North used a special tool, a snow beater. It was a flat, long stick made of bone, antler, or hard wood. Its shape resembled a large knife or sword with blunt edges. This tool was always kept at the entrance to the dwelling, a teepee or igloo. Before entering, a person had to go through a cleaning procedure. The snow was knocked off with sharp but careful blows, beating it out of the fur and folds. It was important to do this before entering a warm room. If the snow melted on the clothes, the water would soak into the fur and leather. It was extremely difficult to dry such clothes in the conditions of the polar night. Beaters were often made from reindeer antlers, as this material is very durable. The smooth surface of the antler did not catch on the fur and did not damage the clothing. These tools were often decorated with intricate carvings, turning them into talismans. The patterns could tell the story of the hunter or their clan affiliation. It was especially important to carefully clean shoes and the lower part of pants from stuck snow. If snow was left on moccasins, it would melt. The leather would get wet and freeze in the cold. This made the shoes hard as stone, slippery, and very cold. Walking in such shoes was impossible and dangerous to health. For fur clothing, using a beater was the only way to preserve thermal insulation. Fur that had become matted from water would no longer trap air and keep the body warm. Dry and fluffy fur, on the other hand, created a reliable barrier against the bitter cold. The beater restored the fur's natural properties. Women strictly ensured that men and children did not bring snow into the house. This helped to keep the interior of the dwelling dry without increasing humidity. In the cramped space of a teepee, excess moisture was unacceptable and led to illness. A dry floor and dry skins for sleeping were the key to good health. This simple cleaning ritual was the first and main line of defense against dampness. It required iron discipline, especially when a person was tired and cold. They wanted to get to the fire as soon as possible, but they had to stand and clean themselves in the cold. It was this discipline that saved lives in the Arctic. Even today, polar explorers use brushes to sweep away snow before entering their tents. The principle remains the same. Don't let the enemy into your home while it is weak. The Indian beater was the ancestor of all modern clothing care products. Why do you think such simple rituals are often forgotten in today's comfortable world? For the inhabitants of the Great Plains, the bison was a source of food, tools, and of course, clothing. The bison cape, or robe, was a versatile item that replaced a coat, blanket, and tent. But the secret was not only in the skin itself, but also in the way it was worn. The ability to wrap oneself properly in a robe was an art that allowed one to stay dry. The skin was always worn with the fur inside in cold weather to retain body heat. However, during rain, the tactic was changed depending on the strength of the wind and precipitation. The smooth, tanned outer side of the skin served as an excellent water-repellent layer. Often, this side was painted with glue-based paints, creating additional protection. People wrapped themselves in the cape to minimize the number of openings and gaps for water to enter. The top edge was pulled over the head, creating a kind of stiff hood. The skin was thick enough to hold its shape and form a visor over the face. This protected the eyes and face from direct rain. Particular attention was paid to the direction of the pile and the position of the edges of the skin on the body. The cloak was positioned so that water could run down it unhindered. This was the principle of roof tiles. The upper layer overlapped the lower layer, directing water to the ground. Water should not be allowed to collect in folds or pockets. Under such a cape, a warm and dry microclimate was created due to body heat. This warm air dried the inner clothing if it had become slightly damp. The bison skin was so thick that only many hours of heavy rain could soak it through. It worked like a heavy but reliable shield. During the night, without a teepee, the cape instantly turned into a sleeping bag. The hunter lay down on one half of the skin and covered himself with the other, tucking the edges under himself. If it snowed, it covered the sleeper from above, creating a snowdrift. The snow served as an additional insulator, preventing it from penetrating the skin and reaching the body. Bison wool has unique properties. It is thick, curly, and retains heat well. Even if the outside of the skin got wet, the thick undercoat inside remained dry. This made it possible to survive the night in the open steppe even in severe frost. In the morning, the cape was simply shaken off and was ready for the journey. It was important to ensure that the edges of the cape did not touch the damp ground. To do this, it was tucked under the belt or constantly held with the hands from the inside. The skill of wearing aruba determined the status of a warrior and his experience in the eyes of the tribe. Young warriors learned this from the elders over many years. Old smoked capes were valued even more than new and beautiful ones. Over time, the leather became impregnated with body fat and smoke from fires, becoming waterproof. It was clothing that became better and more functional with years of use. It preserved the history of its owner. The bison cape is an example of how one item can serve many functions. It was a portable home that a person always carried on their shoulders. One of the main and most dangerous problems on any long hike was inevitably wet shoes. In the wild, wet feet are not just uncomfortable, they are a direct path to frostbite and gangrene. The Indians knew very well that the mobility of the entire group and the success of a military campaign depended on the condition of their feet. Losing the ability to walk meant becoming vulnerable to the enemy and the elements. Leather moccasins, despite all the ingenious impregnations with fat and smoke, still got wet over time. Leather is a porous material that has its limits of moisture resistance. This happened especially often when walking through tall morning grass covered with heavy dew. Deep snow was also a serious challenge, as it melted from the warmth of the feet and soaked through the shoes. To avoid fatal problems with their feet, the Indians used a strict shoe rotation strategy. A warrior going on a long journey or hunting never relied on just one pair. That would be the height of recklessness, unacceptable for an experienced tracker. He always carried 2 or even 3 spare pairs of moccasins on his belt or in a special backpack. As soon as the shoes on their feet became dangerously wet and began to get cold, they would immediately make a short stop. They could not be lazy or endure discomfort in the hope that they would dry out on their own. The wet pair was immediately taken off and sent to dry by any means available. A dry and warm pair from their reserves took its place, restoring comfort to their feet. This iron discipline allowed them to keep their feet dry most of the time during the journey, regardless of the weather. Dry feet retained body heat and allowed the warrior to move quickly and silently. The women of the tribe spent weeks preparing as they saw their husbands and sons off to war. They sewed several pairs of shoes for them, putting prayers for their return into every stitch. Often these spare pairs were different in purpose and design. Some were made with thick soles of stiff rawhide to protect against sharp rocks and thorns. Others were very soft, like socks, designed for silent reconnaissance or sleep. Such a varied supply of shoes was the best gift and the highest expression of love and care. Drying wet moccasins in camping conditions was an art in itself, requiring attention and patience. Under no circumstances could they simply be thrown into the campfire, as inexperienced novices did. The intense heat caused the wet leather to shrink instantly, shrivel, and become hard as a rock. Footwear damaged in this way was virtually impossible to restore. Therefore, moccasins were hung at a safe distance from the heat source on special spacers. The heat had to be gentle and gradual so that the moisture evaporated evenly. Often, if it was not possible to build a fire, they were dried directly on the body while moving. They were hung on the belt so that the wind and sun could do their work. If the moccasins still hardened a little after drying, they had to be kneaded with the hands before putting them on. This was done at every stop, methodically restoring the elasticity of the leather by mechanical means. Sometimes the leather even had to be chewed so that saliva and mechanical action would soften the fibers. The softness of the shoes was critical to the health of the feet. Stiff and rough shoes could rub the feet raw in just a couple of kilometers of fast walking. Bloody blisters quickly became inflamed in unsanitary conditions and could lead to blood poisoning. A warrior with rubbed raw feet lost his combat effectiveness and became a heavy burden for the entire unit. Therefore, shoe care was a matter of survival for the whole group. In some cases, the Indians used a tactical trick that could be called the wet feet method. If they had to wade across an icy river, they would take off their moccasins to keep them dry at all costs. The warriors crossed the cold water barefoot, risking slipping or injuring themselves on sharp rocks at the bottom. The pain from the cold water and rocks was considered a lesser evil than wet shoes in winter. Shoes were repaired immediately upon the discovery of the slightest scuff or hole. A small hole could quickly turn into a big problem, letting in water, snow, and cold air. This negated all efforts to stay warm and could lead to frostbite on the toes. Therefore, every evening, the warriors carefully inspected their moccasins. A bone needle and strong deer sinew thread were always at hand for an experienced tracker. The sinew had the property of swelling from moisture, tightly sealing the needle puncture and making the seam watertight. Repairing equipment was as important and mandatory a ritual as cleaning weapons or feeding horses. Lives depended on it. This seemingly simple logistics, having a supply and changing shoes on time, was more effective than complex technologies. It required nothing more than foresight, discipline, and hard work from those who made the shoes. It was a victory of organization and common sense over harsh environmental conditions. Without the constant and hard work of the tribe's women, such a survival strategy would have been impossible. It was their tireless labor that provided the warriors with the reserves of strength that enabled them to make their legendary journeys. Every step a man took on the warpath was supported by the skill of the women who remained in camp. We have talked a lot about protection from water on the outside, but what was going on under the outer clothing? The secret to comfort lay in the right choice of undergarments and materials. Native Americans often wore shirts and leggings made of the finest suede directly on their bare skin. This material acted as a second skin, regulating moisture. High-quality deer suede has a pleasant velvety pile structure. This pile creates a microscopic air layer between the fabric and the skin. Air is the best insulator, and this layer helped to effectively retain body heat. This prevented hypothermia even in strong winds. Unlike plant-based fabrics such as linen or cotton, leather does not cool the body when wet. Even wet suede quickly warms up from body temperature and begins to act as a warm compress. It does not stick to the body as unpleasantly as wet synthetics. The feeling of a wet rag on the body was practically absent. This ability to breathe and wick away moisture was critically important during exertion. Sweat was absorbed into the leather and gradually evaporated through the pores of the material. This prevented sweat from accumulating on the body while running or working. Dry leather meant warmth, and warmth meant life. In winter, they used the principle of layering, wearing several shirts. A thinner and softer inner shirt was worn under a thick outer shirt. The air between the layers of clothing created additional powerful thermal insulation. If it got hot, the top layer could be removed or loosened. Particular attention was paid to ensuring that clothing was not tight and did not restrict movement. A loose fit ensured normal blood circulation throughout the body. This was the main condition for keeping the limbs warm in severe frosts. Tight clothing constricts the blood vessels and a person freezes much faster. Special clothing was made for children and the elderly from the skins of small animals. Rabbit or muskrat fur was worn inside, against the body. It was the most delicate, soft, and effective protection for the weak. Such a thermal suit allowed people to survive the harshest winters. Lap belts and separate leggings instead of pants also made sense. This made it easy to dry individual items of clothing without having to undress completely. If only the leggings were wet at the bottom, they were removed and dried separately. The body remained covered and warm. This approach to undergarments ensured maximum adaptability to conditions. People could regulate their heat exchange by adding or removing layers on the go. It was a flexible system designed for survival. It was a system built on the feelings and personal experiences of generations. Everyone tailored their clothing to themselves and to the current weather conditions. The last and perhaps most important secret to Native American survival had nothing to do with clothing or equipment. It was a whole, deeply developed philosophy of using one's own body as the main source of heat. From an early age, Native Americans learned a simple but vital truth about the nature of cold. It was that as long as you move, you live and stay warm, but rest brings death. In a critical situation, when there is no shelter and your clothes are soaked by freezing rain, stopping could mean certain death. At such moments, the body begins to rapidly lose precious degrees of heat, and every minute counts. Therefore, experienced hunters continued to move with all their strength, maintaining a high level of metabolism in the body. This was the only way to make the blood flow faster and warm the limbs. The active and monotonous work of the large muscles of the legs and back generated a huge amount of heat. This internal heat was so strong that it literally dried wet clothes from the inside. Moisture evaporated under the influence of body heat and escaped through the pores of the skin and the seams of clothing. At that moment, people turned themselves into living stoves, working at the limit of their capabilities. However, there was an important nuance in this process that distinguished a novice from a survival expert. The Indians were able to masterfully control perspiration by moving at a steady and very economical pace. It was important not to let the body sweat too much and the clothes get even wetter. Clothes that were wet on the inside lost their insulating properties and began to cool the body. But it was also important not to cool down by slowing down too much or stopping to rest. It was a delicate balance bordering on art, accessible only to experienced warriors. It was necessary to walk fast enough to keep warm, but not so fast as to burn out and become exhausted. The ability to find this rhythm came with years of training and long journeys. If they had to spend the night in the steppe without building a fire or shelter, they used a technique called controlled shivering. This is a special skill of body control where a person does not suppress shivering but uses it. They allowed their bodies to shiver slightly or deliberately tensed and relaxed their muscles. This micro work of the muscles allowed them to generate heat even when immobile. In such cases, groups of hunters slept huddled together, their backs or sides pressed tightly against each other. In this way, they combined the residual heat of their bodies under shared blankets into a single energy cocoon. It was practically impossible for a single person to survive such a night, but the group survived. Collective warmth allowed each individual to conserve their internal resources. Fatty foods provided a lot of slow energy, which was gradually released into the body throughout the night. It worked like a thick log thrown into a fire, which burns long and evenly. It was real biological fuel to keep the body's internal fire burning. A hungry person froze much faster than a well-fed one. A deep understanding of their bodies and their physical limits allowed Native Americans to take risks consciously and prudently. They knew exactly when they could endure the cold a little longer and continue on their way. They also clearly understood when it was necessary to drop everything and urgently seek or build shelter. This knowledge saved them from the fatal mistakes typical of overconfident beginners. They had a very keen sense of the line between mere discomfort and real mortal danger. They knew how to distinguish between simply having cold fingers and the onset of irreversible frostbite. Mistakes in assessing one's physical condition in the winter steppe were fatal. Nature did not forgive overestimating one's own strength. For Native Americans, survival was not a heroic struggle against nature, but the ability to become an integral part of it. Instead of trying to completely isolate themselves from the cold with walls and stoves, they learned to coexist with it. They accepted the conditions dictated by the elements and adapted to them. It was a strategy of flexibility, not head-on resistance. They used the minimum resources available to achieve maximum results and preserve life. Every fold of the terrain, every bush and snowdrift was used for protection from the wind. Saving energy and movement was elevated to an absolute, nothing superfluous, only what was necessary for survival here and now. This whole system, from smoking leather for clothing to controlling breathing while walking, was a single entity. Remove one element, such as fatty food, and the whole defense would immediately collapse. Without psychological preparation, even the warmest clothing would not save you from panic and freezing. But together, these components created the amazing, almost superhuman resilience of people living under the open sky. It was a comprehensive approach where biology, physics, and psychology worked in unison. This is how the ancient inhabitants of the plains survived where modern humans would have perished in a matter of hours. We have looked at 10 unique techniques that allowed the indigenous peoples of North America to survive where others perished. This is not just a collection of historical facts, but evidence of incredible human ingenuity. Every stitch, every strip of fringe, and every method of leather processing had a deep meaning. These technologies have been tested over centuries of the harshest trials by nature. This knowledge reminds us that the most complex problems often have simple solutions. Nature itself provides clues to those who know how to observe and learn. Which of these survival secrets surprised you the most with its ingenuity? Would you like to see a practical experiment with one of these methods in the next video? Write your suggestions in the comments and subscribe to the channel to continue exploring the wisdom of the past with us.